There is a small island in the Seto inland sea of Japan where every afternoon a ferry arrives carrying strangers, and the moment it docks, it is met by a crowd. Not a crowd of people. A crowd of cats. Dozens of them gather at the concrete pier as the boat ties off, sitting, waiting, watching the gangway the way a village once watched for returning fishermen. They flow along the seawall and between the houses. They sleep in the doorways of homes no one lives in anymore. They sun themselves on a school that no longer has any children. On this island, the cats outnumber the people by more than 6 to 1, and the people who remain are almost all over 70 years old. 80 years ago, this was a working fishing village of nearly 900 residents. There was a school with classrooms full of children, a harbor full of boats, a doctor, a shop, a daily rhythm of work and noise. Today, there is no shop, no doctor, no school, no children, no one of working age at all. What is left is a handful of elderly residents living out their last years, and several hundred cats that were never meant to be there, multiplying in the empty houses of a village that the modern world simply walked away from. This is the island of Aoshima, and the cats did not take it, they inherited it. To understand how an island ends up belonging to its cats, you have to understand what it was before, and what Japan decided to do with places like it. Aoshima is tiny. It sits off the coast of Ehime Prefecture, on the island of Shikoku, in the calm waters of the Seto inland sea. The whole island is less than half a square kilometer, a single long ridge of green rising out of the water, with a thin strip of flat land along the shore where the houses cluster. There is no airport. There is no bridge. The only way on or off is a small ferry that crosses from the mainland twice a day, weather permitting, and carries about 30 people at a time. For most of its history, Aoshima had exactly one reason to exist: fish. The Seto Inland Sea is one of the richest fishing grounds in Japan, sheltered, shallow, warm, full of sardine and mackerel and sea bream. Small islands like Aoshima were perfectly placed to work those waters. By the early 20th century, the island had a real community built entirely around the catch. Families lived in wooden houses packed tight against the shore. The men went out in boats, the women processed and dried the fish, the children grew up and, for the most part, stayed. At its peak, just after the Second World War, Aoshima held close to 900 people. That number is worth sitting with, 900 people, on an island you can walk across in 15 minutes. It was densely, fully alive. There was an elementary school and a junior high school. There were shops. There was a Shinto shrine and the festivals that came with it. There was a clinic. There was the constant background sound of a place where people are born, work, argue, marry, and die without ever needing to leave. And the cats? The cats were brought in for a reason. They were not pets. They were tools. Fishing villages have a permanent enemy: mice and rats. Rodents infest the boats where they chew through nets and rigging. They get into the stores of dried fish and the grain. So the fishermen of Aoshima did what fishing communities all over the world have done for centuries. They kept cats to control the vermin, working animals earning their place. For decades, that was the arrangement, and it was stable. A village of people and a modest population of cats kept in check by the simple fact that the village managed them. The cats had a job, the island had a purpose. The boats went out and they came back. Then the world changed around it, and Aoshima could not change with it. In the decades after the war, Japan did something no country had ever done at that scale or speed. It rebuilt itself into an industrial giant. Factories rose in the cities. Wages there climbed. And across the whole country, a single, overwhelming current began to pull in one direction, from the countryside to the city, from the islands to the mainland, from the boat to the salaried job. This is the decision at the heart of Aoshima's story, except it was not one decision made by one government in one room. It was millions of small decisions made by millions of individual young people, all pointing the same way. A teenager on Aoshima in 1960 looked at two futures. One was his father's life, hard, weather-dependent, isolated, tied to the catch. The other was a wage in Matsuyama or Osaka, with electricity that never failed, a hospital down the road, and a future that did not depend on whether the sardines came that year. They chose the mainland, almost all of them. And once that current began, nothing the island could offer was ever going to reverse it, in most of the stories told on this channel. The second act is about construction. The money poured in, the towers raised, the runway laid. Aoshima is the opposite. Its second act is not a building. It is an emptying. a slow, decades-long subtraction of human beings, one funeral and one departure at a time. The mechanism is simple enough to describe and brutal to live through. It is the same machine that has hollowed out remote communities across the developed world, and in Japan, it ran faster and harder than almost anywhere on Earth. It works like this. The young leave first, because the young are the ones with somewhere to go. They go to the cities for school and for work, and they do not come back, because there is no work to come back to. With the young gone, no children are born on the island. With no children, the school loses its students. When the school closes, and on Aoshima it did, the island loses the one institution that might have given a young family a reason to stay. The last families with children leave. What remains is the generation too old to go, the parents and grandparents aging in place, in a village steadily emptying around them. You can read the whole collapse in a single number, the population. Nearly 900 people just after the war. By the 1960s, already falling fast. By the 1980s, down to a few dozen. By the 2000s, into the teens. In the 2010s, when the wider world first noticed the island, the human population had fallen to somewhere between 15 and 22 people, the figure drifting downward every time someone counted, because every count was interrupted by another death. And the average age of those who were left was past 70. Think about what that actually means to live inside. The clinic closed because a doctor cannot make a living treating 15 patients. The shop closed because 15 customers cannot sustain it. So the food now comes in on the ferry, ordered from the mainland, carried up from the pier by people in their 70s and 80s. The school sits empty, its windows intact, its classrooms preserved like a held breath. The Shinto festivals that need dozens of hands to carry the shrine cannot be performed as they once were. There are houses standing along the shore, solid, roofed, furnished, whose owners died years ago and whose children, now grown in some distant city, have no reason and no will ever to return. They simply stand there, full of someone's furniture, slowly going to ruin. This is the texture of what Japan now calls its disappearing villages. Across the country, there are thousands of communities classed as Genkai Shuraku, marginal hamlets, settlements where more than half the residents are over 65, and the community can no longer sustain its own basic functions. Demographers have an even starker term for the final stage: communities that have crossed the point of no return where no recovery is possible, and the only remaining question is the date of the last resident's departure. Aoshima is one of the clearest, most photographed examples of a process unfolding quietly, in thousands of places at once. But Aoshima had something the other dying villages did not. It had the cats. Remember why they were brought: to kill the rats on the boats. For as long as the village was full and functioning, the cats were managed, fed, used, and kept to a working number. But the same emptying that pulled the people away pulled away everything that had kept the cats in check. There was no longer anyone running a fleet of boats. There was no one neutering the strays. There was simply a shrinking number of elderly people, many of them kind, many of them lonely, who fed the animals that gathered around them, and cats left unmanaged and fed. Do the one thing the human population of the island had stopped doing entirely. They multiplied. A pair of cats becomes a dozen becomes 50, 50 becomes more than 100, then more. As the human numbers fell through the floor, 20, then 19, then fewer, the cat numbers climbed in the opposite direction, until the ratio inverted completely and the island belonged by sheer count to the animals. 6 cats for every person, by some counts more. They colonized the spaces the people had left behind. The empty houses became shelter. The disused harbor became a hunting ground. The school grounds, the shrine steps, the seawall, the narrow lanes between the silent homes, all of it became cat territory. The village had been built by humans for humans, and now it was being slowly repossessed by the descendants of the working animals those humans had once brought to serve them. For a long time, no one outside Ehime Prefecture knew or cared. Aoshima was just one more dot in the demographic data, one more hamlet sliding toward zero. And then, in the 2010s, a photograph got loose on the internet. What happened next is its own strange chapter, and it changed the island without saving it. Sometime around 2013, images of Aoshima began to circulate online. Tourists and a few journalists had made the ferry crossing and come back with pictures that were impossible to look away from. A lone elderly woman on a concrete pier surrounded by a sea of cats flowing toward her. Cats packed onto the steps of an abandoned house. Cats draped over fishing gear that no longer caught anything. The world had a name for it within days. Cat Island. The internet did what the internet does. The images went everywhere. And Aoshima, a village that the modern economy had judged to be worth nothing, no industry, no future, no working-age residents, suddenly had the one thing that travels furthest on the modern internet. It was adorable, and it was eerie, and those two things together were irresistible. The ferry, which for years had carried almost no one but the islanders' groceries, began arriving full. Visitors came from across Japan and then from around the world, crossing the narrow strait for a few hours to be swarmed by cats and to photograph a place that felt like the set of a film about the end of something. It is worth being honest about the collision this created. On one side, a handful of residents, most of them women in their 70s and 80s, who had spent their whole lives on a quiet island and were now watching boatloads of strangers arrive to photograph their home and their animals. On the other side, visitors, many of them kind, arriving with bags of cat food and treats, wanting to help, wanting the picture. The food was a problem of its own. Well-meaning tourists fed the cats so heavily and so erratically that it made the underlying situation worse. More food meant more kittens, and more kittens meant more cats on an island that could not support the ones it already had. At one point, the islanders had to put up notices asking visitors not to feed the cats certain things and to leave food only in designated spots. A village of people in their 80s found itself, in its final years, managing a tourism phenomenon and an animal welfare crisis at the same time. Eventually, the cats themselves became a problem too large to leave alone. The colony was not a healthy one. Unmanaged populations like this suffer, disease spreads, kittens die, the animals fight and starve in the lean seasons. In 2018, a veterinary group worked with the island to carry out a mass sterilization, neutering a large share of the colony to stop the numbers from climbing further. It was an act of mercy and management, not rescue. The goal was not to revive the island. It was to stop the cat population from growing on an island where the human population could only shrink. Because that is the part the photographs never quite captured. The cats are not a happy ending. They are a symptom. Every cat in those viral images is standing in a space that a person used to occupy. The reason there is room for 600 cats is that there is no longer room, no reason, no life, no future for the people. The island did not become a sanctuary. It became a vacancy, and the cats moved into it. And the clock on the human side never stopped. The residents who were in their 70s when the cameras came are, if they are still there at all, in their 80s or beyond now. There are no replacements. No young couple is moving to Aoshima to take up fishing. No baby has been born there in living memory. The arithmetic is not cruel or kind. It is simply final. One by one, the last residents will leave for a mainland hospital, for a care home, for the cemetery, and at some point on some unremarkable day, the last human being who calls Aoshima home will board the ferry, and the island will become what it has been slowly becoming for 60 years, a place with cats on it and no one to feed them. The same story is being written across Japan, in places without cats to make them famous. The country's population is shrinking and aging faster than almost any nation in history. The government has counted hundreds of inhabited islands and thousands of mountain hamlets on the same trajectory as Aoshima, sliding towards zero, one funeral at a time. Some have already crossed it. There are villages in the Japanese hills today where the last resident has gone, and the houses stand exactly as they were left. The calendars still on the wall, the fields returning to forest. Aoshima is not an exception. It is simply the one that was photogenic enough for the rest of us to look at. These are the places power forgot. Not abandoned in a single dramatic act, but conceded slowly by an entire society quietly deciding in millions of individual choices that the future lay somewhere else. No one closed Aoshima. No government evacuated it. It was simply outvoted by the modern world, one young person at a time, until all that remained was the old, the empty, and the animal. It is easy to look at the photographs and feel something warm. A pier full of cats in the afternoon sun is a charming image, and the internet loved it for exactly that reason. But stand on that pier a little longer, and the charm thins out. The cats are gathered because someone fed them. The houses behind them are empty because someone died or left and never came back. The school is silent because no child was ever born to fill it. Every soft, sleeping cat in those pictures is lying in the warm gap where a human life used to be. Aoshima was a village that did everything right for 300 years. It worked the sea, raised its children, kept its shrine, and fed its working cats. It did nothing wrong. It simply existed in a world that decided, gently and completely, that it no longer needed small islands of fishermen, and there was no version of the future in which a place like this could win that argument. The cats will outlast the people. For a while, the tourists will keep them fed, and then the ferry will stop being worth running, and the last of the strangers will stop coming, and the island will be left to the descendants of the animals that were brought long ago to kill the rats on boats that no longer exist. That is what is left when the modern world moves on and forgets to look back. Not ruins, not rubble. Just a green island in a calm sea full of cats, waiting on a pier for a boat that will, one day, no longer come. The place's power forgot. If this one stayed with you, the next reaches the far edge of the map, to a settlement so remote that its own country once forgot it was still there.